Hi everyone. This week I'm going to talk to you about 70s tarot design. Hi everyone. Today I want to talk about tarot design in the 70s. It's also going to be a sort of comparison of the Morgan Greer here and the Aquarian tarot by David Palladini. And these are clearly, after the Rider-Waite Smith, these are clearly my favourite decks. With this one, this is my original, first ever tarot deck from 79 or so. I threw the box away and I regret it to this day. So, let that be a lesson. I recently got here Morgan Greer in a tin, bridge size, absolutely fabulous, much loved, big success, nice bright reprint there. And I also very recently got for Christmas Aquarian also in a tin. I'm not quite raving about it to the same extent, but that's probably because the Aquarian tarot doesn't really need any kind of improvement. It's so good. Whereas this one, the Morgan Greer, even though it's fabulous, is a bit dark in parts. So the tinned version, the modern tin version, is very welcome then. So I was preparing to make this video last night, and I was looking through Morgan Greer and Aquarian. So here they are like that. And look. The Aquarian's fatter, isn't it? It's slightly shorter and fatter if you have them on top of each other here. So I was preparing to talk about these two decks last night, and I'm very much into Rider-Waite Smith. That's how I learned and all the rest of it. And when I got into Morgan Greer later on, by that time I'd become sort of a bit critical of all the variations in tarot cards, and I noticed that 9 of Swords in Morgan Greer is the one card in the pack which really seems to have a slightly different message from the Pamela deck, because what the Morgan Greer artist has emphasized here is bondage, really, and I don't mean that facetiously here. And this feeling of being tied up is in Pamela's deck 8 of Swords. So I always thought that was quite strange, because for the whole of the rest of the Morgan Greer, it's quite near to Pamela's imagery, and I always thought to myself, that's a mistake. But, how can we talk about mistakes when we're talking about tarot design? That's the question. Also, I've gone much more heavily into tarot research since the pandemic started. I've kind of gone a bit turbo about my tarot. Ladies and gentlemen, I've actually been reading books. I can read, and I can sometimes research books and find them and read them and things, and I can go to shops. And the lovely shop owner Geraldine recommended it to me. Paul Houston, it's the best. He's the best modern contemporary researcher. He's been writing since forever, probably since the 70s or 80s, but this is the latest research on the origins of the tarot cards, their meanings, and it's absolutely brilliant. And what he's done is he's rounded up all the main sources of tarot card meanings. There's Etala in the late 18th century, and then there's the Golden Dawn people, Mathers, the Golden Dawn's sort of party line on things, and then A.E. Waite's ideas. So, and he also pulls in these early astrological readings of the various deacons, like this source called Picatrix, which is 13th century, which seems to have some influence on tarot meanings. And there's also occasionally a source called Patrasi's Cartomancer. But the interesting thing is that, even these sources, they're not contemporaneous with the invention of tarot. They don't go back to the Renaissance. So when tarot was invented, when it started being used for divination, which happened very soon after it was invented, no one wrote down what they felt the cards meant. And so there's a few centuries between the invention of tarot and people starting to write down meanings here. So what can you say? It's not really known. We don't really know what Etala's the earliest one to write it down. And we don't really know who or what his sources were, even though Paul Houston speculates, and he is extremely scholarly about all this. So when you have a card such as, the Nine of Swords, there's a whole stack of possible traditional meanings. There's Eight of Swords, which Pamela has down as a card of restriction. And there's Nine of Swords, which Pamela has down as a sort of a nightmarish situation. But actually, the pre-Pamela ideas about the meaning of the Nine of Swords, is quite an unfortunate card, but not an entirely unfortunate card. Paul Houston writes, except in its reversed position, the card traditionally does not seem to deserve the extremely negative spin placed on it by the Golden Dawn. A tailor, on the other hand, draws on his private sources of maybe Piedmontese information and notes that, among other things, the Nine of Swords signifies religious matters or somebody involved with them. So then we have these long lists of possible meanings of the Nine of Swords, and it has things like failure, delay, deception, disappointment, death, despair. It has Waite did have despair in his list, and Pamela has a picture of despair. So, looking at all this scholarly work, which is kind of state of the art, and it's from now, it's from the 2010s. And then, what have we got? We've got Pamela's deck, which is, I think it's Pamela and A.E. Waite collaborating most of the time, but in the minor arcana, she did go her own way. He did allow her some latitude. He sent her off to the British Library to look at the Solar Busca Tarot, the very, very old Solar Busca Tarot. And that's where they got certain images, like the guy stealing the swords in the Seven of Swords. But he also kind of let her do her own thing in many of the cards. She was a very psychic person. This deck for me is a kind of prophetic book. And she created a deck of cards that is very, very useful for divination. What I want to say is that these decks, which came out in the 70s, were probably not created by people that had quite so much access to all this research as we now have. And by the way, they did come out in the 70s. This one came out in 1970. And this one, Morgan Greer, came out in 1979. Now, if you Google Morgan Greer and Google data publication, there's a big splashy thing comes up on Google or Wikipedia saying data publication 1988. But, I bought this and it came with this. And it says Morgan Greer Tarot, ladies and gentlemen. I think that is the Morgan Greer Tarot, isn't it? And, if we're devils and we look at the date, it says here quite clearly, ladies and gentlemen, 1979. My feeling about these beautiful decks is that they were a sort of a redesign. The Rider-Waite Smith deck is a project undertaken by members of the Golden Dawn to create, in a sense, almost to rebuild the tarot from the various elements that were there and to make it modern and to make it usable and to make it coherent. Certain things, there were adjustments were made. The position of strength and justice were flipped. The court cards changed a little bit, and it was all sort of drawn together. Now, these 70s decks, I think, are more to do with like the look of the cards. I think people felt, because this deck became popular in the 60s with the hippies, and quite right too. It's very nice, and it was recolored and so forth by various nice hippie people. But I think people felt, well, surely, the world is we're now in modernism, we're in the 20th century, everything's roaring ahead. Surely it should be possible to have modern or modernistic tarot packs. So I'll start flipping through and then I'll talk as I go. Otherwise, we will be here till Christmas, won't we? So there are the Fools. And I think what I'm trying to say is that the imagery used in these 70s decks seems to be largely based on the Pamela imagery rather than anyone actually going into the British Museum and researching it and creating new ideas about how these images should go, connecting with the traditional past. I think if you want that, you have to go to this deck, which is the Sheridan Douglas, which was created by someone who belonged to this magical tradition of Golden Dawn people. He was taught by a member of the Golden Dawn. So let's flip through a little bit. I think what we notice is that the camera has sort of moved in, hasn't it? When we compare, I'll do this for the major arcana. We'll just compare what's happening in the three decks. You tend not to see feet in the 70s. Having said that, there's feet. Proved wrong immediately. You don't see very many feet, if any feet, in the Aquarian. More feet. I do talk nonsense, don't I? I think when we get to the minor arcana, you'll see what I mean, the court cards. You don't see feet in the court cards. More exciting, sexy feet for us to enjoy, but not in the Aquarian. My other feeling is that the Aquarian is a little bit less bothered with imagery in the major arcana, and also that's also true of the Morgan Greer, because I mean here we just have lovers, don't we? We don't have any angel. I mean, this is also an invention of Waite and Smith, but we have here Adam and Eve in the garden with the mountain of wisdom in the background, the snake, the flaming tree, the angel. We have a lot of stuff there. Here we really just have lovers. Here we have the black and the white horse. It's like Morgan Greer taking a little bit more imagery from Pamela. Here the black and the white horse have gone, but we do still have the moons. So Morgan Greer staying with the maiden and the lion, and the Aquarian really just doing a picture of a strong person, which could be an emperor. And I learnt tarot with the Aquarian, and it's the major arcana is not terribly traditionally oriented, but it worked for me. It's a magical deck. That's quite Pamela, isn't it? That one less so. There's a lot of Art Deco here. This was the early 70s. And Art Deco was all the rage. Wheel of Fortune. This Wheel of Fortune I find so silly that for a long time I couldn't bear to buy the Morgan Greer. With the hand turning the Wheel of Fortune like in Monty Python. But that is actually a traditional medieval conception of the Wheel of Fortune, that there was a divine hand turning it. And here, these are fabulous. I mean, it's fabulous neo-deco, isn't it? Sort of Egyptian style. But it's very much about design. Justice. Oops. Okay, so they all keep the position of the leg, though they actually flip it. This leg here was a reference to, the crossed red stockings legs are a reference to the Golden Dawn's insignia, which I think involved a red cross. All very esoteric. Now with death, you see they've all gone different ways, though there is some sunrise in the background of all of them. And temperance. I mean, this is when I began to realise that Aquarian was not terribly bothered in the major arcana with traditional tarot imagery. There's no two cups. There's no 1 foot on land and 1 foot in the water. It's just an Art Deco angel, really. But it's lovely. I adore it. Devil here, Aquarian, a bit more traditional than Morgan Greer. Morgan Greer just has, it's like the cover of the Rolling Stones album Goat's Head Soup, isn't it? The Morgan Greer image, which is probably about the same time. Towers, this is the most fantastic tower, and this is, I think, what I mean about it being filmic. The Morgan Greer has sort of dramatic camera work. I mean, so does the Aquarian, I think film was very cool in the 70s. It was having a kind of peak moment. And here, okay, so Morgan Greer is doing its job. It's being quite faithful, and Aquarian just isn't. The Aquarian has taken the bird, I think it's an ibis, isn't it? The bird that traditionally appears in the star and put it centre stage. Moon. So, okay, there we have quite traditional in Morgan Greer. And there, the moon, that's an Art Deco moon. That could be something from the Rainbow Restaurant in Derry and Tom's, or from a Noel Coward set design. And that too, I think Aquarian is just doing what it wants to do. Morgan Greer the camera's gone in close up, and so we're missing the horse. Various judgments, various worlds. Okay, well, let's look at the minor arcana. In the interest of brevity, I'm not going to go through the whole minor arcana, just the ones that I think are the best ones in each deck. And I think, I think the Aquarian is fantastic in the minor arcana. Though I promise I'll be able to show you that there aren't very many feet in either of these tarot packs. That in fact the court cards are just not. Okay, so they've zoomed in, haven't they? There's Page of Rods, and actually, I mean, in the interests of style, the Page of Rods has become absolutely faceless in the Aquarian. Again, the Morgan Greer a little bit more faithful to the Pamela vision. I'm showing you these because I like them very much. Knight of Rods, I think they're absolutely gorgeous, and I think you could have great affection for these. I think, again, on the whole, Morgan Greer a bit better for imagery there. We've got something a little bit more fiery in the colours of the rods, which gives a little bit more help interpreting them. And the Aquarian does have its colour scheme for the court cards, but the colour scheme isn't really what you might call astrological. I mean, these, I think in some ways, I can't quite decide which one is better, because what I like about the Aquarian deck is that there's areas of white. It's very, very iconic in the sense of everything's very, very clear. They're like signs, aren't they? Whereas these, they're bigger and they're pretty clear. But in terms, I mean, this one, it's got a stripped down colour palette. The colours are very, they say in German, plakativ. They leap out at you. They've got lots of contrast. The Two of Cups. Again, this is a card, I'm sorry to be a snob, but this is a card I just thought was a bit too like, I don't know, an advertisement for shampoo or something. And for a long time I was hesitant about buying myself a copy of the Morgan Greer. I mean, the faces are less good in the Aquarian. He's not so good at faces. But I think the design is a bit stronger in some way, a bit more punchy. I like Aquarian here because you have the feeling you're really in the 70s. You've got a diver's mask. I couldn't help feeling that there was a head here in one cup and then a hand holding a flower, but the flower looked a bit like a microphone. And so that for me was a bit like Mick Jagger, his head coming out of that cup and his hand coming out of that cup. And so he was about to sing, Honky Tonk Women. That's how mad I was. But, the mind makes strange jumps, doesn't it? And I also wanted to show you, in those two cases, very, very faithful to the Pamela images. But here, look, again, let me just show you what I mean about the camera having gone in. That's Pamela's solution to that card. We see the feet, don't we, ladies and gentlemen? It's very much, it seems to be more about faces for Aquarian and Morgan Greer. So both of those very faithful. You get the fish in the cup. And you get the same hat, don't you? but you don't get the feet. You don't get the gorgeous thighs in the androgynous mini dress, do you? Which I think is a pity. Especially, you'd have thought the 70s people would have gone for that. Again, I'm showing you these cards because they're my favourite cards in my favourite decks. I love it. I absolutely love it. But we have lost quite a lot of things in this card which would help us to give tarot readings, you know. For me, knights are on horses. Horses are a source of power. You know, we see the landscape in which the Knight of Cups is as flowing water. And we also, as I've commented before, we see the fact that he's very like the Death card, isn't he? He's very like the Death card. And that disturbing but very magical correspondence is lost in the other two decks. And I think that's kind of evidence of these two decks not being quite so psychically packed as the Pamela deck. I think, you know, I learnt with the Aquarian deck, and I think as a teenager, it's very nice to have these two decks, one of these two decks, because they're very, very user-friendly. You can have, they're a bit like dolls, aren't they? You can really have great affection for them. I think that's a fantastic King of Cups from the Morgan Greer there. But yeah, you don't see that his throne is on the waters. He is cut off from land, which is, let's face it, an important part of Pamela's image. The swords in the Aquarian have this wonderful purple background, which is very, very striking. And it's moody, isn't it, the Aquarian? And well, they both are, but I think this is moodier, and it summons up a certain feeling of magic. A very gorgeous purple and pink. 3 of Swords. 4 of Swords, camera right in there. I mean, the camera's a little bit further out there. It goes in a little bit there, and it goes right in onto the face there. I think that's a really good image, by the way. I'm not complaining. But they have lost the image in the stained glass window, which seems to be some sort of image of blessing or healing, which adds something, doesn't it, to the image? I love that. It's so moody. And then, yeah, this is the card I was commenting on before. We all know it from the Pamela deck, don't we? And we think of it as the Nightmare card. And here it seems to become a restriction card. So it raises those questions about the sources of the meanings and how we're going to, you know, construct a tarot vocabulary for ourselves. Who are we going to go to? What's our Bible going to be? I adore this Knight of Swords. He's quite mature, isn't he, this guy? He's not some young thing going out on a quest. He's a real old bastard who's used to chopping people's heads off, I reckon. A very chic guy in the 2 of Pentacles there. We don't see the dancing feet, but we do see the ship on the horizon. Yeah, in the 4, we don't see the city. We don't have this feeling that his miserliness has led him in a way to maybe even be thrown out of the city. Lovely. I mean, this one here, the 79 deck, I think there's a little bit more of the, you know, keep the gays happy. Or maybe all men had moustaches in those days. This, I think, is maybe the most beautiful card in the Morgan Greer. The luxurious 9 of Pentacles. Two more cards to keep the gays happy, but we don't really get the benefit of the horse and the land, and in fact the way he's holding up that pentacle. So, you know, these are cards that you can use, cards that you can love. I don't think they contain all the information. I don't think they contain as much information as the Pamela ones. I mean, Queen of Pentacles, where's the bunny? But they're fantastic, aren't they? And I've chosen this one. I like I like all these Kings of Pentacles. I mean, you know, there's Pamela's. Morgan Greer has chosen to highlight the grapes. Aquarian has chosen to highlight, you know, the Taurus element. Pamela gives you both. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm not being too critical of these lovely, lovely cards. I love them. Tell me how you feel about the various decks and how you feel about this challenge of finding your way around this maze of meanings in tarot. Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next week. Bye. If you've enjoyed this video, you might like to consider subscribing to my channel. It makes a difference. Thank you.